My talk today is called Kelabit and Saban, Invisible Threads, Values and Sociality. And I'll be talking a bit more about this idea of sociality, which really means ways of being together. In the photos, on the left side, you've got a group of Saban ladies comprising their bamboo band. And on the right-hand side, you've got three cousins from Kelabit Longhouse. And I have to say a big thank you to all the Kelabit and Saban who patiently answered my questions and told me their stories. I'll just take you through the roadmap of my talk. First of all, I'll cover some background, some basic points about place, history and migrations. Then we'll go on and talk about values and identity. We'll touch on living in longhouses. We'll talk about culture and the emphasis on the value of door and sociality. We'll talk about megaliths and feasting, name-changing ceremonies, and we'll talk a bit about how food brings people together and the food festival. And I'll summarize really with the idea that the survival of culture is very much dependent on the way values are transmitted, these invisible threads that bring people together. In front of us, we've got a sketch map of the Kelabit Highlands. The important parts are, for our talk today, are the Baram River. You can see its most downriver point at Marudi, not far from Miri. Marudi was a very important port of call for people from the Highlands. To visit the district office was like visiting a Raja's palace, and they felt it was quite something to have visited the district office and spoken to the district officer. And it was also an important point of trade where people would bring items they wanted to sell. Going further up the Baram River, Longakha was an important place because it was a fort where court cases were held. And then if we go right up to the headwaters of the Baram, to all those little dots and places on the map, you'll see Leomato is the last point of call on the Baram River. And beyond that are settlements of the highlands. Further north is Barrio, marked in yellow, and Longbanga in the south, also marked in yellow. There are Kelabit settlements outside the highlands, namely Long Seridan and Long Napier, and Long Badian has a Kelabit settlement, even though the majority there are Kayan. You can see the border, and on the other side of the border is the Krayan River with lots of settlements, which will become a point of reference, and further south, the Bahau River, which we'll also be referring to. So the Kelabit number about 6,500, 20% of whom live in the Kelabit Highlands, which they are seen as their homeland. There are 25 longhouse settlements. The Saban are 1,800 and live in two settlements in the highlands and also in coastal ports around Malaysia. The Kelabit Highlands encompasses the northeastern highlands of Sarawak at an altitude above 1,500 feet and at its highest point, 7,950 feet at Gunung Murud. More specifically, the area bounded by an imaginary line that connects the following mountain peaks and their watersheds from north southwards, that is Gunung Murud, Batu Lawi, Batu Iran, Batu Marigon, Gunung Murud Kecil, and Gunung Melepe. The Kelabit are part of a larger language family known as the Apadwat group or the Dayak group, which comprises about 30,000 speakers, including the Saban, Lumbawan, Kren, Tabun, the Sabah Lundaya, and the Kalimantan Lundaya, among whom are the Berian, Krayan, and Longilu. Barrio is today the main centre for the Kelabit, comprising of a collection of 10 villages. This was the result of a successful government resettlement programme undertaken for security reasons in 1963, arising from the confrontation between Malaysia and Indonesia. Prior to this, Barrio, formerly known as Lembak, was only a single longhouse. Barrio today has a hospital, 2 schools, a commercial centre, homestays, a museum and an airport. There are daily flights, and Barrio can be reached from Miri by car in about 12 to 14 hours. Longbanga is the centre for the Sabang people in Sarawak. There are many educated Sabang working in offices in Bintulu, Miri and KL, and Kuching, and offshore. There's an older Sabang settlement at Long Puat, formerly Long Balong, and the Kenyala Poke live at Long Pulong. Longbanga is located on the old path out of the highlands between Barrio and Leomatu, and is also connected to routes to the Bahau River in Kalimantan. In Kalimantan, there used to be ancestral villages of Pianau, Pinar, Longtua on the Bahau River system. Today, you can visit Sabang at Tanglaan, a modern village on the Krayan River. Longbanga thrived as a military base during the confrontation, and today has an airport, school, health clinic, and homestays, which make it an important centre for the area. There's little published research on the Sabang, but people can look up Google Clare 2020, and you'll find a very interesting article by Alistair Clare, who's an anthropologist currently living in Longbanga. Geography. Barrio has a cool average daytime temperature ranging from 25 to 33 centigrade, and the lowest temperature of night recorded at 11 centigrade. It's also the driest region in Sarawak, with an annual rainfall of 2,371 millimetres a year. Longbanga has a similar climate, but it's less cool at night, with a recorded temperature of 16 centigrade. Both Barrio and Longbanga are served by all-weather airstrips with planes from the mass wings. The capacity for planes, though, has been reduced from 18 to 19 packs. This is because they have had to do this for safety reasons, because the airstrips are found to be below the approved length. Longbanga has 3 flights a week, while Barrio has 3 flights a day. The main modes of transport in the highlands are by air from urban centres and by logging roads. 4-wheel drive vehicles and motorcycles are common. The highlands has long been isolated from administrative centres. This means there are a lot of issues facing people relating to safety and accessibility, the maintenance of logging roads, the carrying capacity of flights. Students have to board at schools far away from their homes. There's a high cost of transport and commodities, and the distance for medical treatment and internet connectivity. This presentation is based on research at Long Puluan, a Kelabit longhouse in the headwaters of the Barham River on the edge of the highlands. It's not far, it's a 4-hour walk from Longbanga. And in Long Puluan, at least half of the families, Kelabit families, have Kenya, Ngorek, and Sabang ancestors. And there are several different language groups there, Kelabit, Sabang, and Kenyala Poke. And most people can speak and understand the other's language. Newcomers coming in through kinship, marriage, and adoption become absorbed. And the ease of assimilation of outsiders has something to do with a kind of sociality generated in Long Puluan, related to value and the adat. So Long Puluan happens to be my husband's longhouse, and I've been associated with that with 40 years of marriage. And it was affected by a fire in 2018. I'll tell you a little bit about our connections with Sabang. In this family photo, you can see a younger version of myself and my husband in the back row. And on the right-hand side is my sister-in-law, Pastor Ramat. And she was adopted by Tamalalo and Sina Lalo, the couple next to her. Sina Jao, the next lady, and Tamalalo are brother and sister. Tama Jau, that's Sina Jau's husband, who's not in the photograph, and Sina Lalo are adopted siblings. The three women, all wearing baju kebaya, are all first cousins as their fathers are siblings. And there's a Peter Aran, a Kelabit from Pamada, is also related to this family through marriage. My brother-in-law, Osak, had an adopted Saban mother and great aunt. And my husband's first cousin, Nicholas, also married a Saban woman whose auntie welcomed us when we went over the border to visit Tanglaan in Macrayan. Adoption reinforces relationships in new areas of settlement, while other kin are very far away. In the case of the Saban, it was 7 days' journey back to the Bahau area. And other Kelabit families elsewhere in the highlands have shared genealogies with the Saban. This is Uncle Tamalalot when I first met him in Marudi. He was bringing us upriver to Liomatu, a 4-day journey by boat. And it's important to know that perhaps in the case of Long Pruan, it was the Saban who were bringing people to Marudi by boat. They were successful boatmen and successful business people and very much involved in trading. The Saban were previously known as the Kelabit Saban, and Long Puluan was known as a Kelabit Saban Longhouse. The Saban who came to work in Kuching, whom I met in the 1980s, would say they're Kelabit, as no one had heard of the Saban. Their language and customs are related. 82% of their vocabulary is common with the Kelabit spoken in Barrio, but Kelabit find it difficult to understand as it's gone through a very rapid phonological change. There were significant adoptions and intermarriage between the two groups, and there are shared genealogies across the highlands. And if we look at this photograph of this beautiful Saban lady, Nan Bulang Jalong, this photo was taken by the Sarawak Museum team that visited in the 1990s. And she's wearing a typical bead headband, which are in the colours that the Kelabits like, but it's a half headband as opposed to a full whole helmet. And she's wearing a bark cloth jacket, which is made by the neighbouring Kenya Lapoke, and very Kelabit beads that are highly prized in this area, consisting of yellow labang beads and lots of blue beads. She's also wearing very striking tattoos, which are typically Saban. And if we look at this photo of women photographed by Jongijangs in 1917, their costume is not very different. They're wearing a headband, beads, and a bark cloth coat. And I'm just going to now take us to 2023 to share with you another form of collaboration between the Saban and the Kelabit. And this is at the Highlanders Games Carnival in 2023, where Team Longbanga Longpuluan became a very powerful force and actually were the overall champions. I have to give a special mention here to the under-11 futsal team that really did the Longbanga LBP team great pride. But this is a modern way of seeing how the Saban and Kelabit come together. That's just a quick flash there. I want to talk a bit more now, though, about Saban autonomy. The Saban Community Association registered as Persatuan Masyarakat Saban Miri in 2003, and they produced a Saban dictionary together with linguist Dr. Beatrice Clare. There are many cultural and linguistic similarities. Their heritage, they have a shared heritage of longhouse culture, although the Saban only have now one small longhouse at Long Quat. They both grow hill and wet paddy, paddy adan, They used tattoos and elongated earlobes, and they became Christian at the same time as the Kelabit. Their area of claimed origin, the Bahau River system, has many megaliths, like the Longbanga area. And there are all oral histories that relate the Sabang to the megalithic culture. The Sabang community was added as a native community, which was approved by the State Legislative Assembly in its February 2022 sitting under the Interpretation Ordinance 2022. This ordinance has yet to be implemented, pending guidelines from the State Cabinet. And here we've got a photo of the Sabang Bamboo Band in 2010, with their striking new uniform, which they wear with great pride. I want to take you to a shared origin story that is told throughout the highlands. They used to live together in the mountains between the Bahau and Kelapang rivers, but there was not enough fertile land, so they had to find somewhere else to live, but they were divided as to where to go. A tug of war was held over a ditch between those who wanted to go to the Bahau River and those who wanted to go to the Kelapang River. To begin with, there were fewer people on the Bahau side, but gradually more people joined, so the tug of war was evenly matched. And that's how the group split in two, with one group going to the Kelapang River, the Kelapang being the Baram River in the highlands, and the other to the Bahau. After they split up, ties were continually reinforced between the two groups through intermarriage, adoption, alliances, trade, and storytelling. So let's consider a little bit now theories of migrations. I'm going to go through 3 local theories. The first is that the local accounts of Kelabit origins in the highlands was that they were there since the beginning of time. And this is supported by research that shows that forest clearance and management took place as early as 4000 before Common Era in the highlands, and stone mounds were built 2,500 years ago. And the sites of cemeteries have been in continuous use since pre-Christian times, indicating a long history of occupation in the area by Kelabit Sabang and the people who were there before them. There are other local accounts that say this Kelabit came from Brunei, and some groups moved into the Adang River and to the Liu Plains, the Krayang, Menterang, and Fusan River valleys, and Sabah, the Tinja, Tuto, and Pata rivers. Other origin stories state that the Kelabit migrated from Kalimantan. Bernard Salato talks about the migrations of the Apaduat peoples, and he says that they came from people labelled as Putuk by the Dutch from the Putuk River near Malinau town on the East Kalimantan coast. When attacked in the 17th century, the Putuk moved in 3 different directions: to the Menterang district in the north, to the Krayan Tengah area in the middle, and to the Krayan Ulu further south. The people in Krayan Tengah moved west to a large lake area, and after some migrations became the Lumba as they planted wet rice. These are the ancestors of the Kelabit wet rice farmers who farmed the Kelabit Plateau. Other early groups went from Krayan Ulu into the Bahau. These were the ancestors of the Sabang. The Sabang informants claimed to be autochthonous to the Bahau River basin. This dispersal is matched by linguistic evidence that related groups who spoke the Apaduat languages, including the Kelabit, were spread out over a considerable area. And this is a consequence of the wide networks of kin created through the practice of sociality, ways of being together. We know through oral history that Blawing Tungan from Padiit, a Kelabit area, was a headman over a number of longhouses in the Bahau. So there was a great deal of ethnic mixing. The names Kelabit and Sabang are exonyms given by outsiders. Kelabit was a name given by Charles Hose, the Brook resident. It's said that when a group of visitors told him through an interpreter they were Kelabit, he mistakenly heard Kelabit. Thus, they became labelled as Kelabit, with the Brooks policy of identifying the tribes under their rule. Previously, they'd been known as the Main Marut. Sabans appear in the Sarawak Gazette of 1884 and were described by Hosen McDougall. They were also known as Lumpana or Ulun Brau. The name Saban was given by the Kenya Wangbo for being strong and brave in warfare, Ngaban meaning invulnerable. In the 19th century, it was a tumultuous time. There was an increase in warfare, and there were lots of migrations close to the border with Dutch Borneo. There was plague, smallpox, epidemics sweeping across the highlands from the 1880s to the 1930s. The Kelabit went to the Marudi peacemaking in 1899, and the major Kelabit peacemaking took place in 1908 with Douglas's expedition to the highlands. This was after a punitive expedition to the Krayang in 1905. On Douglas's map, which was drawn and published in 1912, early settlements are marked and the salt springs at Pamain and Pa'umor. From Douglas's map, Kelabit country became the Kelabit Highlands. The Sabans with the Sabat Pa'asing of Krayang group went for the peacemaking in Marudi in 1908. They were escorted by some 3,000 Baram, Kayan and Kenya, and boat races were held after the event. The Saban had also been involved in the petitioning for the fort at Liamatu with the Kelabit. They also contributed to the making of the fort. By 1911, barter trade was flourishing at local centres at Liamatu, Longaka and Marudi. And stimulated by trade, some Kelabit groups settled at Long Peluan on the southern end of the highlands, and the Saban began to settle in the 1920s and 30s in the Long Peluan area, as this was an important route. However, there was tumultuous change taking place since the Japanese occupation, when the Kelabit and Saban participated in the Australian-led Japanese forces mission to liberate Borneo from the Japanese. Contact was made with Christian missionaries in the 1930s. In the post-war years, their belief systems were transformed by their complete conversion to evangelical Christianity. This led to the first school, which was started in 1946. In turn, local communities started their own schools. Long Balong School near Longbanga was important for Kelabit, Kenya, and Saban students. These village schools were taken over by the local councils until they came under the Malaysian National Education System in 1963. This is a wonderful photograph, which is in the Australian War Memorial Records. One of the allies, and Toby Carter, with Dita Balang in 1945. A large number of Saban came together with the Lepoka neighbours to settle in Sarawak from Kalimantan after the Japanese occupation, encouraged by Tom Harrison, the curator of Sarawak Museum. This was in recognition of valuable assistance they'd given him during the Japanese occupation. In fact, Tom Harrison brought two elders with him, Libana Poi and Jalan Yi, to the Sarawak Museum to work. In addition, Kelabit were also brought to the museum to help with taxidermy, classification of natural history objects, and to make models. Anyu Perak came from Kuching in 1948. He was renowned for his skills as a craftsman, particularly in metallurgy. And if we see this wonderful photo of him wearing a wonderful clouded leopard headdress, and he's got hornbill ivory earrings and prized beads round his ears, round his neck, show him as really a great man of stature. And on the far right-hand side is a door which he carved for his father-in-law, which is now in the Sarawak Museum old building. Another man who came to Kuching was Lian Laban, who worked at the museum all his working life and published the first written stories of Kelabit folklore. And he was an important source of knowledge for museum curators and specialists. His brother also came to work in the forestry department. Tayun, Darabalan, and Puloribu were other Kelabit who came to the museum but worked for shorter periods. Nima Ayu came to the museum but went on to train to be a medical assistant, Henry Jalla and David Lian as teachers, and Stephen Brow as an agriculture assistant. Kelabit and Sabah were engaged in Ngaran, extended journeys to travel for trade, and working in logging camps and oil plant plantations, and in the Sarawak Museum, counted as travelling far. This was an aspiration, and it was similar to an accomplishment in warfare. And the items that they brought back, jars, beads, and sewing machines, for example, and chainsaws, were items that were really prized. Young boys were trained for going on these extended journeys. They would be tested by challenges by their elders, for example, staying a long time underwater, going somewhere frightening at night, enduring a difficult forest trek with heavy loads, withstanding pain, and throwing boulders. This was a grooming for the endurance and skills needed as men in this difficult environment. People had to have these qualities of endurance because they lived in a remote location. And you had to be tough walking across the highlands. But although the highlands were remote, they weren't so isolated in that people were connected through footpaths and through trade in salt and dama and wild rubber and jungle produce. So here you can see a group on a trading journey. This was the group we travelled with when we went back to the highlands in 1984. And people are bringing things that they need for their houses. And it was a long 3-day journey through the forest. Women had their own rattan backpacks to match their size. And there was a custom of girls having their ears pierced in infancy, with increasing weights added to stretch their earlobes. Ears had to be looked after, and a woman's posture had to be grateful, a way of grooming women in self-control and self-endurance. Dongai senino, ma'ait senika. A wrong move and your earlobes would be torn. These are qualities that underlie the social status of being lundo, one of the good people. Self-control and endurance are indicators of standing and of values. So on the left, we've got Tijan Bala, who I photographed in 1984, and Sina No'o, who's still proudly wears her long earrings. And Tijan shared with me that she had long ears. She really liked it because when she was at school, she was always called for an event or function. But after she finished school, she wasn't comfortable because her ears were heavy and it was hard to take care of them. And she was also an athlete. So she rarely wore her long earrings as she grew older, and she eventually had her ears stitched up. Now we come to another aspect of values and endurance, and that is the wearing of tattoos. And this was both the Kelabit and Sabah, it was the women who had tattooing done to them rather than the men. And these were testimonies collected by Associate Professor Dr. Pauline Bala. No man would ever want to marry a woman who did not have tattoos covering her 2 legs. I had to endure the pain and the sight of blood streaming down my legs. Darker tattoos were considered better, and legs were repeatedly pricked after the wounds from the first day of tattoos were healed. It was intensely painful, but the irony was you were not supposed to cry, moan, wail, or weep in the process. So tattoos were drawn by older women who were specialists. There was payment in beads. So only women who could afford could pay. Tattoos were put on people above the elbows to the back of the palms, and from the legs, from the thighs to the ankles. Sharp bamboo needles were used, dipped in soot, and they were made from burning tree resin and inserted in the flesh. The wounds were wiped to remove blood and soot to prevent infection. Semi-completed tattoos were considered something not to be proud of. So you were under complete pressure, even though your tattoos were very painful, to go the full length and have your full set of tattoos. And this lady, the late Sina Poyang of Longbanga, is wearing Saban tattoos, but she's originally a Kelabit. So you can't really always tell who is who from their tattoos. So tattoos were evidence of women having undergone a rite of passage. The use of tattoos distinguished women from differing ethnicities, and they were used in warfare as a means of marking the provenance and status of captives. I want to talk about something else which relates to identity, and that's the values of beads, which connected women. Young girls were taught by their mothers to recognize the most valuable beads and to never sell them unless they really had to. Really old beads were considered to be very valuable, an indicator of wealth and status. If inherited, they connected a girl with her grandmother or great-grandmother. A woman who wears bead necklaces, a cap and belt on occasions when she needs to, indicate her standing that she really is a woman of quality. And if you see in this picture, Uding is wearing a very old set of beads on her head. And you can tell that because they're slightly uneven, where this young girl is wearing a much newer set of beads because they're very smooth and shiny as a bead cap. Women have to be ready, though, to forego their beads for the sake of the standing of the family. Beads, like rice, can be easily split up and reassembled through different transactions. Beads are sold to raise money when a whole household is facing a difficulty, such as a son is in hospital or a promising student needs money to go for tertiary education. If you want to read more about the values attached to beads and the barter trade system, I can refer you to the 2015 Sarawak Museum Journal and an article by Dr. Pauline Bala. So this is a lovely bead helmet belonging to the family of Lupong Bala in Barrio. And these are Sabang bead styles. Here you can see on the top picture, yes, a group of Sabang ladies greeting and singing to our former PM, Najib. And there you've got the beautiful bamboo band with their bright yellow headdresses. I'm going to do something now about values, about living in longhouses and living together. In the past, longhouses were temporary buildings and people migrated to look for the best land. Longhouses were the best means for living, for mobilizing the large groups of people needed for paddy farming and for self-defense. For example, in Long Pruan, the longhouse site changed 10 times since 1917. The first longhouses were built of soft timber, split bamboo, tree bark, and leaves were used for the roof, a bit like the one in the picture that was made in the 1990s on a temporary basis. In the 1950s, axes and hand saws were more readily available, and they started to build more permanent structures. The longhouse endures over time because of the values of sociality and living in groups. Many people are grouped together under one roof. The longhouse represents something more than a building made of wood or bamboo. As, to quote James Fox, the house is culturally emblematic. From a physical structure, you can begin to trace the ideals and social values of a society. And to illustrate how longhouse people submit to collective goals, there's a large group of people living in urban centres supporting those living in the longhouse of Long Pruan. They pool resources to support the continuity of the longhouse. Rebuilding the longhouse that burnt down at Long Pluan in 2018 was only possible through the efforts of people living outside the longhouse at fundraising. And here you can see the interior of the old longhouse in Long Pluan, where you can see on the far left-hand side a hearth with stacks of wood. And further along, there's a room, and then there are more hearths. In Kelabit longhouses, you've got these open verandas with fires, with hearths all the way along, without the partition of kitchens. This is another example further up. You can look right along the hearths. This is another picture from Long Pluan, and you can see a whole corridor of open hearths. So the longhouse consists of two parallel buildings with a tower, an outer veranda used for big events, with sleeping apartments upstairs and an adjoining block for hearths called tetel. The Kelabit and Saban longhouses are characterized with hearths with no partitions in between. Close kin, brothers, sisters, and cousins live next to each other. This makes it easy to share food and provide for visitors and look after children. The open hearths are the center of family life, where food was prepared and cooked, and where people would huddle for warmth. Unmarried men used to sleep on the tower, so would visitors. It was where feasts were held. In the past, there was no such thing as privacy in the Kelabit longhouse. Today, architecture is changing with separate kitchens in many longhouses and separate houses. I want to say something about perhaps the most important value for the Kelabit, which is being do, and yuk, which refers to mobility. Kelabit leaders come from the good people, or the people of quality. The people Lundo, whose status in the past had an economic foundation through successful production of rice. The leaders of this come from this group of people. And in Saban, the term is Lunwoi. But there are also Lundaat. And you don't hear people ever talk about Lundaat. It's always in a whisper. And you just don't raise the subject. Lundaat were perhaps descendants of slaves or people who are judged not to be able to look after themselves. However, despite being a Lundo, one of the noble families through birth, a person's position or standing is fluid. Being Lundo is not rigid, but blurred. It's under continual assessment. And mobility is derived from the bilateral kinship system. That means you can work out your ancestors from your mother's side or your father's side. Adoption, marriage, education, professional and business success, and positions in church. These create new indices of being considered do. And this is the key to understanding the striving character of the Kelabit. Mobility is also a feature of Saban social structure. And this idea of being do has to be matched with consistent behavior. You're described as do guy, industrious, do mukul, diligent, do rema, generous, do baya, loyal or supportive, do gali, accommodating, do nia, kind-hearted, and do naikaru, soft-spoken and well-mannered. And I've put this picture of the Kelabit hearth because you can see above it how hardworking the people who own this hearth are, because it's full of firewood, showing how industrious they are. They've always got firewood ready to keep their fire going. So these values that I've just mentioned are important qualities that reflect manners in relation to others. And these are crucial for the social cohesion and survival of people living in close proximity to one another, where relationships depend on precarious balance. This is prescribed by the adat. If consensus and unity are fragile, the longhouse risks breaking up and can become separated and scattered. These are also qualities required for successful rice farming, as a person needs to have the prerequisite interpersonal skills to mobilize a viable work group and the ability to work hard. So these values were very important for leaders. The migrations of Kelabit and Sabang were fueled by the desire to have a better life and the quest for standing. People sought land for better surpluses of paddy or provide better protection for enemies. Chiefs competed against other for followers, and they had to demonstrate their standing according to the values or adat. And this was based on their ability to lead people and their capacity to provide for others through self-discipline and hard work, hospitality and generosity. They had to provide food when was needed, make and repay loans, and most important was to have good relationships through good manners. Thus, the purpose of maintaining and creating and increasing the standing of leaders is to create bigger and more stable social groupings with alliances and extended kin, as the Kelabit referred to as our people. And these extended networks, in this case, Kelabit and Sabang, were crucial for survival. And rice plays a very important role in extending the networks. And this is a picture of a Kelabit chief, Milian Tukun, who happens to be my late father-in-law. So the economic manifestation of value of being dot for a couple is to have large paddy feeds and to be able to feed children and your household and have surpluses. Successful cultivation of rice is important to the survival of the household. You have to have enough to feed everyone, and the more working members you have, the better. And parenthood and having children is very important. Parenthood is celebrated as a transition of status by both the Kelabit and Sabang by naming ceremonies. And we'll be talking about naming ceremonies and feasting later on. Here you can see people laying out packets of rice at Barrio Asal in preparation for a big feast. So adopting children reinforces and widens networks along non-biological lines. And adopted children sometimes stay with their biological families, like my sister-in-law, Pastor Rahmat, and they have rice sent to them by their adopted parents. Adoption is very frequent between Kelabit and Sabang. And kinship is a rice-based kinship. It's a kind of sociality that comes about by attaining and maintaining being dog through nurturing children, feeding and sustaining work groups and kin. It's an inclusive and broad notion of sociality. So the value of feeding people rice creates what you could call a transcendent sociality. Giving people rice, feeding people is about giving life. A friend remembers a story. Rice is life. When we eat rice, we partake of life. Rice is the most generous plant of all. If we don't plant paddy, there is no life for us. Remember the song about the girl who refused to help elders in their farms? She went hungry and didn't lift a finger to help. She starved and eventually died. The extraordinary value attached to rice provides the motivation for taking up the practice of rice cultivation, which is a very difficult and onerous task, as you can see in the photo, which is mitigated only by the sociality it generates. And you'll see that rice, if you go on any plain out of the highlands, there are always boxes of rice going to relatives on the coast and in the cities beyond. Now, from the subject of rice, I want to move on to the legacy of feasts. And this quote by Tom Harrison is very pertinent. This was going back to a time in the 1950s. In this photograph, you can see a man sitting down distributing food to women higher up. You can see a man in the corner trying to get meat out of the bones between his teeth. And you can see a woman with a long arm passing a metal container full of rice wine. And this is a Hedda Morrison photo of a feast in the Highlands. But I'm going to read Tom Harrison's quotation. It's the intention of the host to put on the biggest show possible. Once they've decided to hold an irao with ample rice in stock, then back and brain goes into making this a rip-roaring success. A people traditionally and naturally hospitable, proud and competitive between communities, now become engrossed in outdoing all others, and thus making their name for the year and other years to come. There is plenty of calculation in all of this. And at these feasts, there would be music, songs, and epics, reinforcing the values. Songs enhancing the daring deeds of heroes, promoting the warrior cult, then invited intervention of the spirits, songs welcomed and entertained guests, and released emotions that could not openly be expressed. And here we've got a very loved Saban aunt, Ponang, holding her lutong, her Saban bamboo harp. So the big feasts were very important, relating to funerals. Both Saban and Kelabit practiced secondary burial. A body would be kept in a wooden coffin close to the family apartments on an outside platform until resources were ready to hold a feast. The spirit of the deceased was hovering, and offerings would be made. A family would gain considerable standing in the community by holding the feast, and this was to commemorate the deceased elder. The prestige of the event was determined by the capacity of hosts to command the workforce necessary to prepare the buffaloes, pigs, rice, wine, and gifts of salt, to entertain several longhouses at once, and to erect a stone monument, clearing on a mountain ridge, or cut a ditch. And here in this photograph, you can see a native officer present, and people are sucking the rice wine out of these prized jars. A kawan is a clearing which shows up against the skyline. In the past, people made a kawan during a death feast, and it brought together a large group of people to work on the clearing of trees to commemorate a deceased aristocrat. The clearing would become the passageway for the spirit of the deceased to go to the world beyond. So below, you can see the kawan at Pugang Pawan was cut by people in 1999 in Barrio Asal in anticipation of the millennium. The late Datu Robert Lian explained that it's a symbolic opening for the Kelabit to go out there, to go and conquer the world, and to say, we face the world with confidence. We're brave enough to face the world. So this kawan was done with a new meaning. And there are more kawan that you can see on the horizon in the barrio area. And there's a series of 4 that were built by an elder called Samara Langit in the 1930s. And these have been cleared and restored on the skyline in 2021 by his descendants. Another part of the landscape that is modified is the making of ditches or nabang. The meaning of nabang, according to one elder, is nadurun marar, which means to walk along a bridge of elders, as the nabang is built along a prominent section of the footpath where everybody passes, and everyone remembers the significance of the ditch. That is, who the person was who made it, and for whom it was made, and the standing of these people in the community. So this is another monument, if you like, that is made. And then we come to stone monuments. Megalithic stone structures dot the highland landscape from Longbanga, the Klapan to Lumbawang Highlands, the Bahau and Krayan areas of Kalimantan, and Long Pasir in Sabah. These consist of dolmen, menhir, batu sunapud, stone mounds, and porupun, and engraved stones, batu narit. According to now we're going to talk about these stone mounds called porupun. According to the Kelabit in Sabah, they were related to the big funeral feasts of wealthy people. This porupun at Pabuda is 30 meters in diameter and 2 meters in height. It was thought to have been made to keep the valuables of a childless couple. A similar one at Palungan was found to be some 2,500 years old. There are many cultural sites in the highland, and they fall under the Sarawak Cultural Heritage Ordinance and need to be gazetted, interpreted, protected, and managed. Over 60 sites were being located by the ITGO, 543 noted by anthropologist Hitchner, and Ghani identified another 20 sites around Longpuruan and Longbanga. And there's been recent archaeological work by Lloyd Smith and Jones. We're coming to say something about burial chambers. These dot the highlands, and they're composed of dolmen made up of immense slabs and supported by several upright stones and arranged to form a chamber in which the remains of the dead were placed. Above is one that's at the old settlement of Pamai, and there's another one on the right in the Longbanga area near Papua. And this is the big dolmen, the Batu Ritong, which is at Palungan. According to local legend, it was erected for a Kelabit aristocrat called Ritong during a feast, which many people were invited to help. It's a burial site, and a purupun in the vicinity has been excavated and found to be 2,500 years old. This one has been listed as a historical monument, but there are many, many more that need listing. There's another category of commemorative monuments that are linked to ancestors who live in people's memories. For example, near Ramodu, there's a carved stone work by Anyi, the master carver, in honor of Pengulu Tingan, commissioned by his son, Pengulu Miri. And there are also a number of standing stones associated with secondary burials, which are in people's memories, such as this one in memory of Batu Sunapad Along Tingan, built in memory of Along Tingan. So I want to sum up, and I'm taking from the work of archaeologist Nick Ghani about the Kelabit Highlands megalith tradition, which developed in 3 different phases. There were large stone mounds, Purupun, which are the largest megalithic type, dating 2,500 years ago, which coincide with the exploitation of sago palm. The second phase of megalith building is the construction of smaller stone mounds and dolmens and stone jars from AD 1400 to AD 1800. The third phase is characterized by the making of standing stones, or menhir, which have been observed until around the middle of the 20th century. Megalithic monuments were built by the Kelabit Saban and other related groups as funerary and commemorative monuments for important individuals, accompanied by big feasts. These were huge undertakings in terms of cost and labor, and thus the megaliths were also seen as markers of status, of being part of the good people. I move on now to talk about the conversion to Christianity. With conversion of Christianity took over all forms of social life, and secondary burial was abandoned, and the making of rice wine was strongly discouraged. And so the culture of megaliths and making stones was also disappeared. The major rites of passage, such as child initiation and death feasts, which used to be celebrated with abundant supplies of rice wine and the singing of epics, have been replaced by naming ceremonies, weddings, and big church celebrations. The church is a venue for meeting people at the daily church service or the evening service. Important notices are read out in church. Pastors play an important role in the community as mediators and advisors. The church district, comprising of several churches, becomes a means for church services to be organized on large multi-ethnic scale. And this is very, very visible in the Longbana Longpaluan area, where many communities get together on rotation for combined church services. Christmas and Easter are celebrated in the community. People celebrate open house. Visitors are served varieties and cakes and cookies and drinks. And a longhouse community meal people will get together for a longhouse community meal on a potluck basis, and Christmas prayer services. Easter celebration lasts for 4 days at least. In Barrio, the whole community will get together at the central church for worship and fellowship. Special speakers are invited to give sermons. And this year, the anniversary of Christian revival will be a special 50-year celebration, and there will be a Jubilee celebration in Miri called the Tribal Gathering. The harvesting season takes place in January and February. Harvest Thanksgiving or the Papulu will be held after the harvest of the crops. 10% of the harvest is offered to the church as a sign of gratitude to God for his blessings. And now I want to say something about the name-changing ceremony, because this is another important Kelabit tradition, a celebration which continues still today. I'll explain first of all, the photograph is of the late Datu Robert Lian's name-changing ceremony in December 2021. I'll explain first, the name given at birth is Angadan di Iit, a young person's name, Agan li Pangosupang, with no special meaning. When you're a parent, you get a new title. You're Tamabo or Tamamo, father of a boy or a girl, or Sinabo, Sinamo, mother of a boy or a girl. The name-changing ceremony is held to affirm one's transition to parenthood and grandparenthood. And the new parents and grandparents are required to take up new names to mark their new status. It makes people big with their ability to provide. So I'll start with the new names in this family group. Very often the new names for grandparents are very new, but Datin Dr. Catherine Pierce, her parent name was Sina Balanglibun, which means the tiger that overtakes, or you could say the name means pace setter. Her grandparent name was completely different. It's Puntomo Polong, which means the big agatus tree of the forest, which really suits her as a tall botanist. Datu Robert Lian, on the other hand, decided when he became a grandparent to reinforce his own name. So he called himself Balanglibun Tupun. Apoy, his son, took on the name, and his wife took on the name Tama and Sina Saging, which is an ancestral name which renews family networks, because Samaga Saging was well known from Patik to Barrio Asal and makes more and more connections through your kin. Other family members also take on new names. But I've only got time here to talk about another custom associated to name changes. Non-Kelabits are adopted into Kelabit families, goes with the hospitality tradition, and they're given new names to honor their contribution to the community. With new names, Kelabit dress is often given. So Tamsri Dr. Adenan was given the name Maran Ribud, handsome nobleman, but it also means a man of very good heart. Datuk Petinggi Jabu was given the name Balan Mudut, the Great Development, the Father of Development. Prof. Dr. Muhammad Kadim Suhaidi, of the Vice Chancellor of UNIMAS, was given the name Balan Tao, much talked about, creating impact. The themes of ability, fame, nobility, and goodness recur and reinforce the value system. Okay. In a similar way, Saban give names to children such as Mina Apoi, and with intermarriage, some Saban change their names dramatically, like the Kelabit do. And there are some names loaded with meaning, such as Brun Ajang was the famous gong. On parenthood, Saban are addressed as Taman, for example, Taman Bungan Jalong, Ornan, mother of Bungan Jalong, or Puan, grandfather of Bungan Jalong. These names bestow respect on parents. And children are also given names according to their age in the family. So from oldest to youngest, these names go Yi, Ape, and Wa, and the girls are called Sueng and Nan. And this is a photo of Sina Bulan in Long Peluan, a Kelabit lady who married a Saban with her Saban tattoos. So I want to talk a bit about the values of feasting and food, and I'm quoting from Alistair Clare. When I asked a Saban, a Kelabit, what it meant to be a Kelabit, he listed the values, notably hospitality. The sharing of food is an important expression of hospitality, status, and friendship, and a means for coming together with visitors. Food is to the Highland community its fabric, culture, tradition, and an economy. It's a very important part of the value system. We've mentioned the importance of rice. Salt was also very important, as it was the only product available to give food, because until 1980, when the road came, you had, and airplanes came, you had very limited garlic, onions, and soy sauce. Salt was an important trade item, and it was also used for taming buffalo. It connected the Kelabit and Saban with buyers from as far away as Brunei. It gave them an edge in transactions with outsiders, wealth, and independence. Another important item for trade was Jarang Mera, red wild ginger, which research is going into. It was used as a stomach medicine and also delays the effect of alcohol. But now I want to quote from Tom Harrison. Tom Harrison wrote an article called Kuman in 1960. And he said, the Kelabit are food snobs. It's important to keep a good table. And here he recorded in 1 month of eating in the highlands 12 different types of mammal, 18 types of bird, 7 types of small fish and snails, 7 types of grain and tubers, 10 types of cultivated roots and creepers, 9 types of cultivated leafy vegetables, 12 types of cultivated fruits, 9 types of wild fruits, 11 types of wild food, and 6 extras, which included tobacco, rice beer, and coffee. And the Kelabit still continue to have a variety of food. The photo I took there was in Batu Patong in 2021, and you can see real asparagus here, aubergines, Dayak aubergine, tomatoes, and passion fruit. And one farmer is now concentrating on large-scale ginger production, but a number of crops have been grown experimentally in the Kelabit highlands, ranging from tea, coffee, ginger, cardamom, cabbage, turnip, carrot, strawberries, and different kinds of oranges. This is the wild asparagus you can see in the picture. There's a local spinach called Tanayan. These are often found wild in other places. Krid kuru, which is dried and put in porridge. Tapioca leaves are pounded and eaten with a small berry. Tapioca roots are steamed and grated. Ginger stalks and flowers are eaten and used as flavoring. Banana flowers and stalks are harvested. There's lots of different kinds of wild food, fish and snails, game and deer and wild boar, but not so much wild boar in recent years, and insects such as sago grubs and these clatang, which have got a lot of flavour. You can find these, if you're lucky, in the highlands. There are lots of different kinds of wild mushrooms that are foraged, as well as bamboo and sago shoots. There's lots of traditional methods of cooking that people really like to go for: barbecuing, smoking and drying, and making meat and fish into floss, which is eaten as surrounding or porridge. Innards of herbivores are stewed as buri. Rice, meat and fish is cooked in bamboo. And here you can see lots of women working with them harvested mustard, and you can see that cooking and food is really social. Rice is cooked in different ways. It's steamed in the pot, wrapped in leaves. Pulut is wrapped in smaller parcels and steamed. It can be made into flour and turned into rice cakes. And it can also be cooked in pitcher plants. There are lots of different kinds of rice porridges that are served with mushrooms, mustard leaves, ginger flowers, dried meat or dried fish. Buffalo are reared, and so are sheep. And the Irau Pesta Nukanam, the Barrio Food Festival, is a great event in the year. It started in 2005. This is a photo taken from 2015 with a group of people from Long Peluan, most of whom have Saban parents or ancestors. We see the food festival as a coming together of heritage food and wild local food and new experimental foods such as jams, dried pineapple and chili. And some food is cooked with contemporary ways of cooking with garlic and curries. And these are food festival snapshots. There's huge competition between different communities as to who's got the best stall. And another niche product in the Highlands is Highland cinnamon and pineapple, which is a popular crop grown on the hill slopes. Here my husband's being welcomed to the Highlands. He's the great stimulus behind my research. Here pineapples are highly prized as a vegetable as well as a fruit. Tenon is at the very beginning, we saw lots of tenon berries in the video that was taken. And tenon is used in Chinese medicine. It's an insecticide, it's an antioxidant. And communities in Palungan and Papukat are benefiting from a project with SBC, which is extracting the oil from this plant, tenon, which is known as Lutsia cubeca. Longbanga participated in the food festival this year with their niche products. They produced wonderful tapioca chips, and they're now really fine-tuning their production of Liberica coffee together with a coffee merchant in Kuching known as Earthlings. They've got fantastic support from government organizations as well. And so they're really trying to go far with the niche product of the Liberica coffee. And here they are at the food festival in 2023. So I'd like to say that at the food festival, there is a renaissance in culture as we remember that epic songs and oral histories died out with conversion to Christianity. And Sape is being revived and traditional songs are being sung. Traditional games are being revived with the throwing of boulders and top spinning. You have a lot of fun with the greasy pole. And bamboo is being used for building, and musical instruments using bamboo are being revived. And sociality is a key value promoted through food and through pocho pocho dancing. Although I have to say, I really regret the way pocho pocho dancing is replacing the beautiful singing with the long dance. So to sum up, I will say that the Saban and Kelabit have long shared affinities, ancestral links through legends, genealogies, kinship and adoption. People are ethnically mixed, not just in Long Puluan and Longbana, but also in other parts of the highlands. They have a shared history of migrations, Christianity, the Japanese occupation, and confrontation. They've got shared linguistic roots, shared values of feasting, sociality, and community. Today, sports teams and the church district bring people together. Today, the Sabans are reclaiming their own identity through the interpretation ordinance. They want to register their births as Saban, and they're seeking to determine their own identity. And here we've got a photograph of first cousins in Long Puluan, 3 ladies born Kelabit, the lady in the middle married a Saban and has Saban tattoos. And if you want more information, go to my website and do look out for my book, Border History from a Borneo Longhouse, The Search for a Life That is Very Good. Thank you very much, everyone.